The chamber had no windows. The Shalveth did not believe in windows. Windows implied doubt, an openness to whatever lay outside the walls. The Grand Council of the Shalveth Dominion made its decisions from a place of total certainty, surrounded by stone and polished metal and the soft, steady hum of 6,000 years of unbroken power. High Commander Vorath stood at the center of the chamber. His dark carapace had been polished to a mirror shine. He was tall even for his kind, nearly 3 meters of armored muscle and cold intelligence, and he had never, in 40 years of military command, lost a war. He did not expect to lose this one. He had not even considered the possibility. "The vote," he said. 12 council members raised their hands. All 12. The 13th seat belonged to Ambassador Velrith of the Kethari Observer caste, and Velrith's hand stayed folded in his lap. 13 present, the recorder said. 12 in favor, 1 abstaining. The resolution passes. The chamber filled with the sound of approval, secondary limbs striking the table in rapid rhythm, 12 sets of them, the percussion of certainty made physical. Velrith watched them and said nothing. He thought about Istanbul. 3 years ago, standing on a bridge over the water that divided 2 continents, watching the humans flow past him like a river that had never once in its entire history considered stopping. Millions of them. They argued and laughed and pushed past each other and stopped to look at things and started moving again. He had watched an old human man sitting alone on a bench throw pieces of bread to birds and look completely at peace with everything. He had watched 2 young humans in the middle of a screaming fight stop screaming, stare at each other, and then start laughing. He had watched a child fall off a bicycle, cry for exactly 25 seconds, and then climb back on. He thought about that child a lot. Humanity is hereby declared an enemy of the Shalveth Dominion and its allied states, Vorath announced. Subjugation operations will begin within the cycle. More percussion, more certainty. Velrith closed his secondary eyes and breathed slowly. He had said his piece already. He had stood up 1 hour ago in this same chamber and said things that nobody wanted to hear. It was over. The decision was made. He would be the only one who was not surprised by what came next. He could live with that. The Shalveth Dominion was not a young civilization. 6,000 years of space travel. 19 species absorbed into their territory. Wars won and wars ended, and peace maintained through the kind of organized, efficient power that lesser species could only dream about. The Dominion had solved poverty. It had solved disease. It had solved the messy, destructive problem of uncontrolled ambition by building systems so well designed that individual desire had nowhere to go except into service of the whole. They were, by any measure they respected, the superior power in this corner of the galaxy. They had been watching humanity for 60 years. The report that Vorath had used to build his case ran to 400 pages. It had been compiled by 300 analysts. It had been reviewed by the top strategic minds in the Dominion. It was detailed, thorough, and confident. It was also, in every way that would eventually matter, catastrophically wrong. The report said, humans are a Class 3 pre-unification species. They maintain over 190 separate nation-states on their home planet, which remain in constant low-level conflict. Their average lifespan is 70 to 80 years, among the shortest of any sapient species in the known galaxy. They are physically fragile, no natural armor, limited sensory range, poor tolerance for environmental extremes. They have been spacefaring for only 140 years and maintain approximately 430 colonies, most poorly defended. They are highly emotional, prone to irrational decision-making, and have demonstrated no capacity to coordinate effectively at a species-wide level. Recommended subjugation timeline, 18 months. Projected resistance, low to moderate. Projected Dominion casualties, negligible. When Velrith had read that report, he had felt something he rarely felt. Not quite fear. Something sitting right next to it. A cold, precise awareness that the people around him had made a very large mistake and that nobody in the room could see it. He had tried. He had stood up and said, I have been to Earth. I have walked among humans for 6 months. I am telling you from direct observation that this report is missing something important. What is it missing? Vorath had asked, patient and polite. It is missing the part, Velrith said carefully, where it explains what humanity has been doing for the past 40,000 years. Evolving, Vorath said, as all species do. No, Velrith looked at the 12 faces watching him with polite, settled expressions. Fighting each other. Every single day for 40,000 years, some group of humans has been trying to kill another group of humans. Not only for resources, not only for territory, for ideology, for pride. For reasons they themselves cannot always explain. They have fought each other with sharpened stones. They have fought each other with weapons that split atoms and left entire cities as glass. They have survived plagues that reduced their population by half and kept going. They have survived ice ages, droughts, famines, and every catastrophe their planet could generate. He paused to make sure they were still listening. What you see in this report is not a weak species. What you are looking at is a species that has been in continuous combat training for 40,000 years. They have more practical experience with warfare than any species in this chamber, and you are proposing to give them a new enemy. Vorath had looked at him with the patience of someone who had already decided the outcome. They have 190 separate governments. They have never once acted as a unified force. They never needed to, Velrith said quietly. They never stopped fighting regardless. Nobody listened. The vote was called. The first strikes fell on humanity's outer colonies at the exact same moment. That was Dominion doctrine, simultaneous pressure on multiple points, no time for the enemy to regroup, communicate, or coordinate. It had ended every conflict the Dominion had fought since the 3rd century of their expansion. It had worked without exception. Subcommander Drelvet commanded the operation against the colony on Kepler 442b. He had run 17 of these in his career. They followed a pattern. You arrived. You demonstrated force that was so overwhelming that resistance became obviously pointless. The population gathered. They were processed. Control was established. You moved to the next assignment. He had never lost a soldier on a suppression operation. Not one. He broadcast the standard surrender demand on all human communication channels. Attention, colony of Kepler 442b. You are hereby called upon to surrender to the forces of the Shalvith Dominion. Lay down all weapons. Gather at the Central Administrative Building. Compliance will result in humane treatment. Resistance will be met with proportional force. He waited the standard 20 minutes. His communication officer looked up. Sir, response incoming. Good, sensible, put it through. A human voice came through the speaker. Male. Some kind of flat, unhurried accent that the translator had difficulty with. The words came out a half-second behind the sound. This is Governor Hank Pelletier of Kepler 442b. Got your message. Drelvet waited for the surrender. No. Drelvet's 4 eyes all focused on the speaker at once. I'm sorry. No, the governor said again, in exactly the same tone a person uses when they've already had this conversation in their head and finished it. We're not surrendering. You want to come down here and try to take it, that's your choice, but we're not handing you anything. Sir, said Drelvet's tactical officer, thermal imaging shows the colony population is, they are constructing defensive positions. They are using mining equipment as barricades. They are distributing what appears to be weapons from private stores and repurposed industrial tools. They have 80,000 civilians, Drelvet said. Yes, sir. Against 6 warships. Yes, sir. Drelvet stared at the communication panel. In 17 operations, he had never once had a colony simply say no. Not in that tone. Not in that flat, unimpressed voice, like he had asked them to do something mildly inconvenient. Send the ground forces, he said. The battle for Kepler 442b lasted 19 days. The Dominion had allocated 48 hours. The colony had no military garrison, no trained soldiers. What it had was 80,000 people who had spent their entire lives in underground mine systems and knew every shaft, tunnel, maintenance corridor, ventilation route, and pressure chamber in that entire rock. They had machines built to move through solid stone. They had engineers who could collapse a tunnel in 4 minutes and open a new one in 6. They had, it turned out, a significant number of former soldiers from a dozen different Earth nations who had emigrated to the colony, and who had spent the 2 days between the declaration and the landing teaching everyone willing to learn. Drelvet lost 340 soldiers in 19 days, taking a target that should have required none. He filed his report using careful language, words like unexpectedly entrenched and non-standard defensive configurations and asterisk challenging subsurface terrain, professional language, controlled language. What he did not write in the report was what he had felt on day 14, standing at the edge of what used to be Mine Shaft 7, looking at the barricade that a group of humans had constructed from collapsed equipment and debris. His analysts had told him this position had been held by about 60 people. He had sent 200 soldiers into that shaft. It had taken them a full day to clear it. 60 people, against 200 trained Dominion troops, holding a tunnel they had known for days they would eventually lose. They had known they were going to lose. They had kept going anyway. His language had no word for that. He had checked. Across 23 colony worlds, variations of the same story were playing out. Some colonies surrendered. Not many. The ones that fought did it differently every single time. No 2 human defensive setups were alike, which meant the Dominion tactical library was useless before the first week was over. Each new world required fresh analysis, new approaches, and new casualty counts that were climbing in ways the pre-war projections had not modeled. The analysts revised their timeline. 18 months became 24. Then 36. Voreth reviewed the new projections in his office and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not concern exactly. The early, distant sound of something off-key in what should have been clean and simple. He called Velrith. The ambassador appeared on the screen sitting in what looked like a human-style chair, holding a ceramic cup of something. The translator identified it as a beverage called coffee. He looked like a being who had been expecting this call. "You've seen the projections," Velrith said, "not a question." "The resistance is more organized than anticipated," Voreth said. "The colonies are coordinating without receiving orders from Earth. There is no central command directing them." "I know. How are they coordinating?" Velrith took a slow sip from his cup. He had picked up the habit on Earth, Voreth remembered. He had picked up several human habits. At the time, Voreth had considered this undignified. Now, looking at the ambassador's calm face, he was not sure what to think. "They aren't coordinating," Velrith said. "Each colony is just doing what each individual human on that colony has already decided to do, which is not surrender. You don't need to coordinate a decision that every person has already made independently. That's not a military strategy. That's a personality trait. You cannot bomb it out of them. You cannot cut off its supply lines. It simply exists in each one of them, separate from any command structure." Voreth was quiet for a moment. Outside his office, the Dominion was the largest military power in this region of the galaxy. He had more ships, more soldiers, more resources than humanity could match in any conventional calculation. "This changes nothing about the final outcome," he said. "I know," Velrith said. "Then why do you look like that?" Velrith looked at him through the screen. 4 pale eyes. An expression Voreth could not read and was beginning to think he should have learned to read years ago. "Because," the ambassador said quietly, "you haven't seen what happens when humans stop defending and start attacking." The screen went dark. On 23 colony worlds, the toll was already higher than the entire previous decade of Dominion military operations combined. And somewhere deep in human space, 47 years of Earth military history was being fed into planning systems. Admirals who had spent entire careers preparing for exactly this moment were picking up communications and giving orders. Something vast and patient and terrible was being pointed, for the first time in its existence, at a single external target. The colonies were not the war. The colonies had barely been the beginning. 3 months into the war, the Dominion High Command gathered at its Central Strategy Center on Shalveth Prime and tried to understand what was happening to them. The room was large, lit by the cold blue light of tactical displays. Holographic maps showed 23 colony systems in various states of conflict. Red indicators marked Dominion units pinned down, taking unexpected casualties, requesting support that was being stretched thin across too many theaters. Yellow indicators showed supply lines that were taking longer to establish than planned. Green indicators, controlled, pacified zones, were fewer than anyone had projected. Fleet Admiral Cresta, who commanded overall Dominion forces in what they were calling the Human Pacification Campaign, stood in front of the displays and tried to find the correct words for what she was seeing. "They are fighting without a doctrine," she said finally. "That is the core problem. Every species we have ever pacified had a military doctrine, a way of fighting, rules, structures, things we could analyze and build countermeasures for. The humans have no unified doctrine because they have 100 of them simultaneously, and individual soldiers seem to shift between them based on whatever seems most useful in the moment." General Vorlan of the ground forces nodded slowly. "In my sector, the same unit fought 3 different engagements in 4 days. In the first engagement, they held a fixed defensive line. In the second, they abandoned the line completely and melted into the civilian population. In the third, they appeared behind our supply convoy, using a route we had assessed as impassable." He paused. "When we captured one of them and asked him how he found that route, he said he had read something about it in a history book about a war they fought on their own planet 300 years ago." Silence settled over the room. "A history book," Cresta repeated. "About a war they fought against themselves," Vorlan confirmed. "He said humans keep very detailed records of every war they have ever fought, and then they read them. Nobody in that room had ever read a detailed record of every war their species had fought, mostly because their species had not fought that many. They had fought some. They had won them. They had moved on. Humanity had apparently treated every war they had ever survived as a lesson worth studying. The implications of that were sitting in the room like an uninvited guest that nobody wanted to name. On the colony world of Brennan's Hope, a Dominion force of 2,000 soldiers was discovering what a determined group of humans could do with 6 months of preparation, a detailed knowledge of local terrain, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Subcommander Threska had been given Brennan's Hope as a straightforward assignment. The colony had 20,000 inhabitants, mostly farmers, a small manufacturing base. According to every pre-war assessment, it should have been among the easiest targets in the initial wave. The colony had been fighting for 11 weeks. Threska had a theory about why, and it was a theory that disturbed him more the longer he thought about it. The humans on Brennan's Hope were not fighting because they thought they could win. He had run the numbers many times, and the numbers were obvious. They could not win. He had more soldiers, better equipment, orbital fire support, and the ability to reinforce as needed. The humans had homemade weapons, repurposed farm machinery, and knowledge of their own fields and forests. They were fighting anyway. Not with desperation either. That was the part he kept coming back to. Desperation he could understand and anticipate. Desperate enemies made mistakes. They took risks that didn't pay off. They spent themselves in dramatic final charges that his forces could absorb. These humans were not desperate. They were patient. They picked positions and held them until holding them was no longer useful. Then they disappeared and appeared somewhere else. They hit supply lines at night and were gone by morning. They left his forces controlling roads and buildings, while somehow the farms and forests around those roads and buildings remained fundamentally hostile territory. His soldiers could walk through a field and see nothing, and then an hour later a supply transport on that same road would be hit. On day 78, his forward position at a river crossing was attacked by what turned out to be 9 humans armed with 3 rifles, improvised explosives, and what appeared to be a very thorough knowledge of exactly where all his external sensors were located. They killed 11 of his soldiers, damaged the bridge, and got away with one casualty. He filed the incident report and stared at it for a long time before sending it. He had also, in Week 9, captured 3 of them. This was where things became genuinely strange. The Dominion's instructions for handling prisoners were clear. You secured them, processed them, extracted whatever intelligence was useful, and confined them until the operation was complete. Standard protocol, applied across 24 conflicts over 3 centuries. It was efficient. The 3 humans captured on Brennan's Hope were 2 men and 1 woman. They were injured, not badly, but enough to require basic medical care. Threska had provided it because his protocol required it. He had fed them because his protocol required it. He had placed them in reasonably comfortable confinement because damaging prisoners unnecessarily was inefficient. He expected nothing unusual from this. What actually happened was that his intelligence officer came to him 4 days later with a puzzled expression and said, "Sir, the prisoners want to talk." "About what?" "They haven't specified. They say they want to," the officer checked his notes, "they want to express gratitude." Threska went to see them himself. The 3 humans were sitting in their confinement cell looking, against all logic, relatively relaxed. The older male, who appeared to be about 50 by human standards, with gray at the edges of his dark hair, and the kind of face that had been weathered by years of outdoor work, looked up when Threska entered. "You're the commander," he said through the translation device. "Yes." "You had your doctor fix up my leg." He gestured to the bandaged limb. "You didn't have to do that. I've heard stories about other camps." Threska stayed quiet. The man continued. "I'm not going to tell you anything useful. I want to be upfront about that. I don't know anything that would help you militarily, but I wanted to say I appreciate the leg." The woman, younger, red hair, a burn scar along one forearm that predated her capture, was watching Threska with an expression he could not categorize. Not hostility, something evaluating and cautious and almost curious. "Why are you still fighting?" Threska asked. He genuinely wanted to know. "You cannot win. Your colony will fall eventually. You are causing casualties on both sides that serve no strategic purpose." The older man considered this for a moment. "No strategic purpose from your view," he said finally. "From our view, every day we make this expensive for you is a day Earth has to prepare. Every soldier you send here is a soldier, not somewhere else. We know we're not winning this colony. We're paying for time." "Time for what?" The man smiled. It was a quiet smile, not triumphant, not angry, just settled. "You'll see," he said. Back on Earth they were seeing. The United Earth Defense Command had been a theoretical organization for most of its existence. It had been created 40 years ago when the first contact with the Shalveth Dominion made it clear that humanity was no longer alone in a universe that might not be friendly. It had run drills. It had developed plans. It had built hardware in quantities that the 190 separate nations of Earth had argued over and funded grudgingly and debated endlessly. Now it had a war. Admiral Yun Jaisu stood on the bridge of the UEDC carrier * Relentless and looked at the operational display showing the full scope of the conflict. 23 colony worlds under attack, 14 still resisting, 9 taken. The Dominion forces were pushing steadily but slowly, far more slowly than they had planned. Every day of that slowness was a day her fleet had used. Her fleet was not small. It had taken 30 years to build, piece by piece, through diplomatic battles and budget fights and technological development programs that had been classified so deep that most Earth governments didn't know the full picture. She had 340 ships. Not all of them matched Dominion vessels 141 in technology, but she had not been planning to fight the Dominion the way the Dominion expected to be fought. She had been planning to fight them the way humans fought. "Fleet status," she said. "All groups ready, Admiral, waiting on your order." She looked at the display one more time. The 14 colonies still resisting. She thought of the people on those worlds who had made the decision to buy time with their own safety, people who had never met her and would never know her name, buying days with blood. "Send the order," she said. "All groups, we're going to war." The Dominion's first awareness that something had changed came not from a dramatic fleet engagement, but from a set of anomalous readings near the Proxima relay stations. Small signals, moving fast, then not moving at all, because they were very good at not being detected, which was a capability that should not have existed in a species that had only been spacefaring for 140 years, except that humanity had been reading books about stealth and deception and ambush for 40,000 years, and had been very motivated to apply those lessons. Sensor Officer Prackville on the Dominion patrol ship Certainty saw the readings, flagged them as possible interference, ran a secondary scan, and then said very quietly to no one in particular, "Those are ships." "How many?" the captain asked. Prackville ran the numbers twice. "Aye, sir, the reading keeps changing. The system is having difficulty resolving them." "An estimate." Prackville looked at his screen, at the numbers that kept shifting as the human vessels did something to their sensor profiles that his system had no reference pattern for, at the sheer number of contacts that were resolving out of what had been empty space. "A lot," he said. "A lot of ships, sir." His captain looked at him. "Get me a number." "I'm trying." There, he stopped. He looked at his readings one more time. Something cold moved through his thorax. "Sir, I think they've been there for 3 days. They've been sitting in our patrol corridor for 3 days and we didn't see them." The captain went very still. "Get me command," he said, "right now." 3 sectors away, in a conference room on the *Certainty**S command station, a Dominion operations planner was about to pick up his morning briefing and read the casualty reports from the colonies, reports that were already much worse than anyone had publicly admitted. He was not going to get to the morning briefing. The human fleet had been patient for 3 months. It was done being patient. The Battle of Kepler's Gate lasted 11 hours. The Dominion had fought space battles before, many of them. Over 6,000 years of expansion, the Dominion Navy had developed tactics, formations, and battle doctrines that had proved effective across dozens of conflicts against dozens of different species. Their ships were well built, well armed, and crewed by professionals who trained for years before being allowed near a combat deployment. None of that turned out to matter very much. The human fleet did not fight the way the Dominion had modeled. They did not advance in standard formation. They did not follow the predicted engagement patterns that Dominion tactical AI had prepared for. They split and merged and split again, different groups moving at speeds and angles that kept changing, and the Dominion formation, designed to face a conventional enemy, kept having to reorganize to respond to a shape that would not hold still. The human ships communicated in bursts that the Dominion signals teams couldn't decrypt fast enough to be useful. They used terrain, debris fields, the gravity of the nearby gas giant, even their own damaged vessels as obstacles, in ways that weren't in any tactical library, because the tactics had apparently been improvised in real time by the fleet commanders. Improvised in real time. Fleet Admiral Cresta, watching from her command ship at the edge of the engagement, received the damage reports every few minutes and felt a specific kind of dread taking shape inside her chest. Not because her ships weren't fighting well. They were. Her crews were doing exactly what they had trained to do. The problem was that what they had trained to do had been designed for a predictable enemy, and humanity was turning out to be the single least predictable species anyone in the Dominion had ever encountered. At hour 7, a group of human ships that had appeared to be retreating turned around. Not to make a last stand, not in desperation. They turned around because the Dominion pursuit force had followed them exactly far enough that the humans now had a positional advantage, and the humans had known, apparently, that the Dominion ships would follow and had planned for that. The pursuit force lost 9 ships in 45 minutes. At hour 9, the Dominion line broke. Not collapsed, broke. Fractured in the middle, with a third of the fleet pushing one direction and two-thirds going another, and the human ships flowing through the gap like water finding a crack in rock. At hour 11, Cresta gave the order to withdraw. She had never given that order in her career. She sat in her command chair for a long time after the engagement ended, looking at the casualty numbers, and thought about the report that had said humanity's resistance would be low to moderate. The news spread across the Dominion's communication network, faster than Command would have liked. They tried to manage it. They issued controlled statements. They described Kepler's Gate as a strategic repositioning. They published numbers that were accurate in a narrow technical sense and deeply misleading in every practical one. They did what powerful governments always do when reality stops cooperating with their narrative. It didn't help much, because the galactic community was watching. The Shalveth Dominion was not the only civilization in this region of space. There were 11 other spacefaring species within reasonable range, ranging from the Velkari Trade Consortium, who were primarily interested in profit and carefully neutral in all conflicts, to the ancient and reclusive Oreth, who had been observing events from behind their borders for 2,000 years without commenting on anything. In between were species of varying sizes, ages, and political alignments. All of them had been watching the human pacification campaign. All of them had expected it to be over quickly, including the ones who had privately hoped humanity would survive, because none of them had expected survival to be a realistic option. Now they were watching the battle reports from Kepler's Gate circulate through the networks, and conversations were shifting in tone. Ambassador Selna of the Velkari Consortium sent a private message to Velrith. It read, "I owe you an apology for not listening to you at the pre-war summit. More urgently, how bad is this going to get?" Velrith read the message twice. Then he wrote back, "Depends on whether the Dominion stops. If they stop now and negotiate, it gets contained. If they keep pushing," he paused, chose words carefully. "The humans are not fighting to survive anymore. They are fighting to win. Those are two very different things, and the Dominion has not yet understood the difference." He sent it and went back to his coffee. He had started drinking more coffee lately. Admiral Yun Jaisu was briefing her senior officers on the asterisk Relentless when the report came in from the retaken colony worlds. She paused mid-sentence, read it, and then read it again. "Good news?" her executive officer asked. "We've retaken 6 colonies." She set the report down. "The Dominion garrison forces surrendered in 4 of them. The other 2, they withdrew when our fleet appeared in range." The room was quiet for a moment. "What are we doing with the prisoners?" someone asked. "Standard protocol, medical attention if needed, secure confinement, UEDC prisoner conventions apply." She looked at the person who had asked. "Why?" "Just making sure," Commander Park said. "There's been pressure. After some of what happened on the colonies," he stopped. "I know what happened on the colonies," Yun said. Her voice was flat and even. "The conventions apply, all of them, every prisoner every time. That is not a debate." Nobody argued with her. That was the thing about Yun. There was a particular tone she got, not loud, not angry, just completely without any space for a different opinion. And when she used it, the conversation was over. The reason she was firm about this was not complicated. It was the same reason the human military had protocols at all, the same reason every hard lesson from 40,000 years of warfare had eventually bent toward the same conclusion, that how you fought mattered as much as whether you won. Not because of some abstract moral principle, but because of a very practical one. You fought the war, then the war ended, and then you had to live with what you had done. She had read the history books too. High Commander Voreth held his emergency strategy session with his full command council and tried to explain what had happened. He was not, by nature, a man who admitted mistakes. He had built his career on being correct, on making decisions that were validated by outcomes, on the kind of total confidence that comes from never having been seriously wrong before. It was a quality the Dominion valued. It was also turning out to be a liability. "The battle at Kepler's Gate was a setback," he said. It does not change the fundamental strategic picture. We have more resources, more ships, more soldiers. Humanity cannot match us in a sustained conflict. With respect, said Subcommander Drelvat, who was in the room because his experience on Kepler 442b had made him the closest thing the Dominion had to an expert on human ground combat. The humans seem to be aware of that fact, and they are fighting as if they are aware of it. Explain. Drelvat chose his words with the care of someone who had been thinking about this for months. They are not trying to match us in a sustained conflict. They are not fighting our war. They are fighting their war. They are making each engagement as costly as possible for us while costing themselves as little as possible. They are attacking our supply lines, not our front lines. They are taking back colonies, not trying to hold territory. They are, and I mean this precisely, they are bleeding us. Slowly. In a way that is designed to make us question whether this is worth what it costs. It is worth it, Vorath said. I know that, sir. The question is whether our supply infrastructure, our crew morale, and our political support at home will agree with us 12 months from now, or 24 months, or however long this takes. The silence in the room was a different kind of silence than the confident percussion of the original vote. This was the silence of people doing calculations and not being comfortable with the results. What are you recommending? Vorath asked. I'm not recommending anything, sir. I'm telling you what I observed. The humans on the ground aren't fighting in a way that makes sense if you assume they care primarily about surviving. They are fighting in a way that makes sense if you assume they are willing to accept significant costs to make our costs significant. That is a different psychology than anything in our models. It's irrational, said the intelligence chief. Accepting heavy losses to impose moderate losses on a superior force is mathematically irrational. Drelvat thought about Mine Shaft 7. About 60 humans holding a tunnel for a day against 200 soldiers. About a governor named Hank Pelletier saying no asterisk in a tone that suggested he had given the matter exactly enough thought and was done with it. Yes, sir, he said. It is mathematically irrational. He didn't say anything else. The first message from the neutral species arrived through Velkari diplomatic channels 6 days after Kepler's gate. It was addressed to both the Dominion and to Earth's UEDC command. It was signed by 7 species. It said, in careful diplomatic language, that the signatories were concerned about the escalating conflict and wished to offer their services as mediators. Between the polite formal lines, what it actually said was, we did not think the humans were going to fight this hard, and we are asking you to please stop before this becomes something none of us can control. Vorath read the message and set it aside. He was not interested in mediation. He had not come this far to stop and negotiate. He had the resources. He had the military power. He needed more time and more force, and he had both available. He sent back a formal reply, thanking the signatories for their concern. He began planning for the next push. On a colony world called New Providence, a teenage girl named Maya Chen was helping move supplies through a tunnel that her father had dug over the past 3 months with a mining drill and a borrowed excavator. Her father was somewhere else in the network. She didn't know exactly where. That was the point of the network. Nobody knew exactly where anyone else was, so nobody could give that information even if they wanted to. She was 17. Before the war, she had been thinking about going back to Earth for university. She had been interested in marine biology. She had grown up on a colony world and had never seen an actual ocean, but she had watched every documentary about them she could find and had decided that was what she wanted. The war had been going for 3 months. She moved the supplies and thought about the ocean. She did not think about whether they were going to win or lose. She thought about what needed to happen next and did that thing, and then thought about what needed to happen after that. Her father had told her once in a different context that the key to doing hard things was not to think about the whole hard thing. You thought about the next step. That was all. Just the next step. She thought about the next step. She moved through the tunnel with her supplies and did not make a sound. Somewhere above her, on the surface, Dominion soldiers were trying to figure out where the resistance was getting its supplies from. They had been trying to figure that out for 11 weeks. On the eastern edge of the conflict zone, 2 Dominion patrol ships detected an anomaly at the edge of a debris field. The anomaly was a human ship, running silent, no active systems, drifting in a pattern designed to look like debris. What it actually was, a communications relay, part of a network of 70 such vessels that the human fleet had positioned across the conflict zone in the opening weeks of the war, giving them the ability to coordinate across systems in near real time, while the Dominion's communications were being disrupted by human electronic warfare teams. The 2 Dominion patrol ships moved to investigate. They did not report back. That was how it went now, not in big dramatic fleet battles, mostly in small moments that added up. A patrol gone quiet, a supply convoy 3 hours late, a garrison waking up to find that the building they thought they controlled was surrounded. Every small moment cost something. Small moments, accumulated over months, became large problems. Voreth's revised timeline was now 54 months. His logistics chief, a careful and methodical person named Brevda who had never served in combat and spent her career managing supply chains, had submitted a private report to Voreth that he had not shared with the rest of the council. The report said that, at the current rate of consumption, the campaign could be sustained for approximately 30 months before resource strain began to affect core Dominion systems. 54 months needed, 30 months available. Voreth put the report in a drawer. He was not out of options yet. He had not yet committed the full weight of the Dominion military. He had been treating this as a pacification campaign, a secondary action, something to be handled by a dedicated force while the main military held its position and maintained the Dominion's broader strategic posture. It was time, he decided, to treat it as a war. He began pulling resources from everywhere else. On the bridge of the Asterisk Relentless, Admiral Yun received the intelligence reports showing the Dominion buildup and nodded once, slowly, to herself. She had known this was coming. She had been preparing for it since before the first shot was fired. She sent 3 words to Earth Command. "They're going bigger." Earth Command sent 3 words back. "So are we, Month 8. The Dominion pushed with everything it had. Voreth had committed the reserve fleets. He had pulled garrison forces from systems that hadn't seen conflict in centuries. He had called in allied contributions from the 3 smaller species that had signed the Mutual Defense Pact with the Dominion, who contributed ships with obvious reluctance and even more obvious private doubts about the wisdom of this. He had assembled, by any objective measure, the largest single military force the Dominion had deployed in 400 years. He sent it toward Earth. Not directly, not in one group. That was not how the Dominion fought. He sent it in 3 prongs, each targeting a different cluster of human-held systems, designed to force the human fleet to split its attention, to stretch its defenses, to choose what to protect and what to abandon. It was a sound strategy. It was the kind of strategy that had won wars. The 3 prongs advanced through human space for 11 days. What they found was not what they expected. Prong 1, under the command of Fleet Admiral Cresta, moved toward the Tau Ceti cluster and found a debris field that had not existed in their charts. Not natural debris. Engineered debris, thousands of pieces of metal and composite material, precisely distributed, that played havoc with navigation systems and sensor arrays. The fleet slowed to pick its way through. It took 4 days to cross what should have been a half-day transit. In those 4 days, human interdiction units hit the fleet's supply ships 6 times from positions inside the debris field, positions that should have been inaccessible because a ship could not maneuver in that density. Somehow the human pilots had done it anyway. Cresta lost 11 supply ships before she cleared the field. Her fleet's operational range dropped by 18%. She was now dependent on forward supply points that her scouts were having trouble confirming as secure. She sent a report back to Command. Command sent back, "Continue the advance." She continued. Prong 2, the central force, hit the human colony system of New Hope and encountered something that nobody in the Dominion had prepared for. The colony was defended, strongly defended, much more strongly than the intelligence reports had suggested. The human garrison had apparently spent the past 5 months building fortifications that the Dominion's orbital scans had not properly detected, because they had been built underground and covered in materials that confused sensor readings. The Dominion assault force landed expecting light resistance and walked into prepared kill zones. The battle on the ground lasted 3 weeks. But the battle in orbit was stranger. The human ships defending New Hope were outnumbered. They knew it. The Dominion fleet knew it. The expected pattern was a fighting retreat, do damage, delay, pull back when the position became untenable. That was the rational response. That was what the Dominion tacticians had modeled. The human ships did not retreat. They attacked. An outnumbered force attacking a larger force is not a new thing in warfare. It had happened many times, across many species, throughout galactic history. What made this different was that the humans were not doing it in desperation. They were doing it with clear planning and coordination, targeting specific ships in the Dominion formation in a sequence that Subcommander Talvesh, commanding the orbital element, only understood in retrospect. They were not trying to defeat his fleet. They were targeting his command and control vessels specifically, his communications ships, his coordination nodes, not the biggest ships, not the most armored ships, the ones that made his fleet think as a unit rather than as individual ships. Within 6 hours, his fleet was still numerically superior and tactically blind. His ships had more firepower and less idea what to do with it. 3 human vessels were destroyed in the engagement. His fleet lost 9 ships and the ability to operate as a coherent force for nearly 48 hours. In 48 hours, the human reinforcements arrived. Talvesh ordered the withdrawal. He also sent a report to command that was considerably more candid than most reports that went up the chain of command. It said, among other things, the humans appear to have studied our tactical doctrine in more detail than we have studied theirs. They knew which ships to target before the battle began. They had this planned. I do not know how long they have been planning it, but it was not improvised. He added one more line. I recommend that command read the history of every war humanity has ever fought before attempting further engagement. They have clearly read ours. Prong 3 had the most direct path. Voreth himself commanded it. He had 1,700 ships. It was the kind of force that should have made everything in front of it get out of the way. It should have rolled through human space with the unstoppable weight of absolute military superiority. Because by every quantitative measure the superiority was real. He had more ships, more firepower, more experienced crews, more resources. The problem was that none of those advantages worked the way they were supposed to against an enemy that would not stand and receive them. Human space was deep. It was a sphere nearly 40 light-years across by this point, with the home system at the center and colonies radiating outward, and every part of that sphere had been seeded with monitoring equipment, prepositioned supplies, hidden installations, and a civilian population that had spent the past 8 months being told, in plain and simple language, exactly what was coming and what they were being asked to do about it. What they were being asked to do was make the enemy's advance as expensive as possible. They did it. Prong 3 moved through human space at a fraction of its intended speed, spending resources at a rate that Voreth's logistics teams had not budgeted for, fighting an enemy that appeared, disappeared, reappeared from unexpected directions, and never once offered the kind of stand-up fleet engagement that the Dominion's advantages were designed for. Voreth did not sleep well. He reviewed the intelligence on human psychology, looking for a lever. All military campaigns had a psychological component. You had to break the enemy's will to fight, not just their capacity to fight. For most species, will broke before capacity. The knowledge that you could not win was enough. You did not need to grind through every last defender to the very end. The calculation became obvious and rational minds accepted it. He read report after report on human psychology. He found the lever. Theoretically, the report said humans cared deeply about their home planet, about Earth, more than about anything else, more than about the colonies, more than about strategic position, more than about any piece of territory. Earth was the center of everything for them, not just practically as the location of their government and their largest population. Symbolically, emotionally, every human, no matter where they were born or where they lived, carried some concept of Earth as the place that mattered most. Hit Earth and you broke the will. That was the theory. Vorath set his course for Earth. Velrith found out what Vorath was planning from a Velkari intelligence contact, who owed him several favors. He sat with the information for 2 hours, turning it over, examining it from every angle. Then he did something he had not done in his career. He contacted the Human Diplomatic Office directly. The human diplomat he reached was a tired-looking woman named Dr. Erica Stern, who had the particular face of someone who had been working 20-hour days for 8 months and had stopped being surprised by things. She looked at him on the screen with calm, measured attention. "Ambassador Velrith," she said, "I know who you are. You're the one who abstained." "Yes, I have information you need. Vorath is bringing his full force to Earth. He believes that taking your home system will collapse your will to fight." Dr. Stern looked at him for a moment. "That's a theory," she said. "It's a wrong theory," Velrith said. "I am telling you this because I want this war to end before it becomes something that cannot be ended. I believe you already know this is coming. I believe you have prepared for it. I am telling you anyway because I want there to be a record that someone on the Dominion side tried." Dr. Stern looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was hard to read. Not hostile, something more complicated. "Why does it matter to you," she asked, "that there's a record?" "Because after this is over," Velrith said carefully, "I would like it to be known that the Dominion was not unanimous." She nodded once, slow, like she was filing the information somewhere important. "Thank you, Ambassador," she said. "We've been ready for this for 5 months." The Dominion fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system at hour 0 of month 9. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in the history of the Shalvath Dominion. It met the largest fleet ever assembled in the history of humanity. The numbers on each side were not equal, but they were closer than anyone watching would have predicted 18 months ago, when the report had said that human resistance would be low to moderate and casualties would be negligible. What followed would eventually be called, in human military histories, the defense of Sol. It would be given other names in other languages and taught in other schools, but the human name was simple and accurate and carried no drama in it, because it was written by people who had been there and knew that what happened needed no theatrical language to be extraordinary. Vorath's fleet came in expecting, if not an easy victory, a decisive one. It was the hammer strike, the final blow, the moment where all the accumulated force came down on the center of the enemy and broke them. The human fleet did not fight like a force defending a home. It was afraid to lose. It fought like a force that had been waiting for this exact moment, that had spent 8 months studying every engagement, mapping every Dominion tactic, stress-testing every weakness they had identified. It fought with the very particular ferocity of an organism that has been patient for a very long time and is now done being patient. The battle lasted 4 days. On day 1, the Dominion's advance elements were met by human units whose positions had been calculated to force the Dominion formation into a specific shape. The Dominion commanders adjusted, as good commanders do. The humans had accounted for the adjustment. On day 2, the flanks of the Dominion fleet were hit simultaneously by forces that had been positioned weeks earlier, waiting. On day 3, the center of the Dominion formation, where Vorath's command ship sat, found itself in a tactical situation that had been constructed around it without his awareness. Not trapped, but constrained. Every move he made opened him to another problem. On day 4, Vorath lost more ships in 12 hours than the Dominion had lost in the entirety of its previous military history. He was not broken, he still had forces, he could still fight. But his logistics officer's report was now impossible to ignore. And there was something else. Something that his commanders in the field had been reporting for weeks, that he had been discounting as irrelevant, that was turning out to not be irrelevant at all. His soldiers were afraid. Not of dying. Soldiers accepted that risk. They were afraid of something more specific and more difficult to address. They were afraid because in 8 months of fighting humans, they had never once been able to predict what the humans would do next. They had never once found the edge of human endurance. They had never encountered a situation where a human force, no matter how badly outnumbered or outgunned, simply gave up. The fear was the fear of fighting something you did not understand and could not model. It settled into units and ate at efficiency and made soldiers hesitate a half-second before acting. And in combat, a half-second was everything. On the 4th day of the Battle of Saul, Voreth received a message from his Allied fleet commanders. The Allied fleets were withdrawing. Not routing, not in panic. A formal, organized withdrawal with a diplomatic communique attached that said, in language that was careful and correct and completely clear, "We did not agree to this. We agreed to a short pacification campaign. This is not that. We are withdrawing from the conflict." Voreth read the message. He sat in his command chair on the bridge of his flagship and read it 3 times. His second-in-command stood nearby and said nothing. "How many of our own ships have we lost?" Voreth asked. The number came back. He had known the number. He had known it for hours. Hearing it out loud was different. And theirs. That number too. He looked at the battle display. Human space stretching in every direction. Earth just ahead which he had not taken and which was increasingly clear he was not going to take. 8 months of campaign behind him. Resources burned. Ships lost. 3 allied species now formally withdrawn. The neutral community watching. Velrith somewhere probably drinking coffee, not being surprised. He made a decision. It was the hardest decision of his career. Harder than the vote in the council chamber. Harder than anything he had done before. He ordered his fleet to hold position. And then, for the first time in this war, he opened a channel to the human command. Not to threaten, not to issue terms. To talk. The ceasefire held for 6 hours before anyone trusted it. Then 12. Then 24. Both fleets remained in position, neither advancing nor retreating, while communication channels that had carried targeting data and battle orders for 9 months were suddenly carrying something different. Voices. Careful words. Long pauses while translators worked and both sides tried to determine whether the other side meant what they were saying. Admiral Yun Jaisu conducted the first real conversation from a small room off the bridge of the Asterisk Relentless. Just her, a translator and a communications officer. No ceremony. She had not worn her formal uniform. She was in her standard working clothes, which were clean but showed the wear of 8 months of continuous operation. Voreth appeared on the screen in full command armor. She noticed, without reacting, that it showed wear too. Small scratches and faint stress marks that hadn't been there in the pre-war intelligence photos. "Admiral Yun," he said. Her name in his language was a series of clicks that the translator rendered as a formal address. "High Commander," she said. A silence. "I have studied your species for this campaign," Voreth said. "I have read everything my analysts compiled. I have reviewed every engagement report from every theater of this war." Another pause. "I do not believe I understood what I was reading." Yun waited. "What I want to know," Voreth said, "is whether there are terms under which this can end, and whether you are the right person to discuss those terms." Yun thought about the colonies, about 23 worlds that had paid a steep price for the months of delay that had let her fleet prepare, about the people in tunnels and shafts and improvised bunkers who had made themselves into obstacles for an empire because someone had to, about Maya Chen, somewhere on New Providence, whom she had never met and would probably never meet, who had moved supplies through tunnels and thought about the ocean. "I'm the right person," she said. "Tell me what you're offering." The negotiations lasted 3 weeks. They were held on a neutral station that the Velkari Trade Consortium made available, in a conference room that smelled faintly of a Velkari air treatment system, which had its own particular smell that neither human nor Shalveth found comfortable. That turned out to be useful. Shared discomfort is a modest kind of common ground, but it was something. Velrith was present as an observer, at his own request, and with the quiet approval of both sides. He sat in the corner and drank coffee from a travel container he had brought from somewhere, and mostly did not speak, unless someone asked him something directly. He had been waiting for this room for 9 months. The Dominion side, led by Vorath, came with a list of what they could offer: territory, resources, formal recognition of human sovereignty over the colony worlds, an end to hostilities. The language was careful and the concessions were real. Vorath was not a fool. He understood the position he was in. The human side, led by Dr. Erica Stern of the UEDC Diplomatic Office, listened to all of it. Then she put a different document on the table. The document was not a list of demands. It was a framework, and it was more complicated than a list of demands, and it asked for things that were harder to give than territory or resources. "You started this war," Dr. Stern said, "because you looked at humanity and decided we were weak enough to take. We need to establish with enough structure that it holds that you were wrong about that, not as a point of pride, as a practical matter. Because if the only outcome of this war is a ceasefire, then in 20 years when we've both rebuilt, whoever is in that seat," she gestured at Vorath, "is going to look at the same intelligence reports and think maybe this time it'll be different." Vorath was quiet. "What is it you want?" he asked. "We want a peace that's expensive enough to break that neither side tries to break it. We want the colony worlds left alone permanently. We want formal diplomatic status at the Galactic Council level. We want the Dominion to publicly acknowledge that this war was a mistake." She paused. "That last one is not for us. It's for the rest of the galaxy." Vorath looked at her. "You want me to stand in front of the Galactic Council and say we were wrong?" "Yes. That will have political consequences for the Dominion, domestically that." "I understand that," Dr. Stern said. "I'm asking anyway." Another silence. "If I do that," Vorath said slowly, "what do we get?" "You get to go home," Dr. Stern said, "with your fleet, with your remaining forces on the colony worlds. We don't pursue, we don't press the advantage, we stop. Right now, everything we have, we stand down." She looked at him steadily. "You get to tell your people that you ended this war before it got worse, which it would have." Vorath held her gaze. He knew she was right. He had run the numbers enough times to know she was right. Another 6 months of this campaign and the Dominion would begin to feel the strain in systems that had nothing to do with the military. Supply chains, industrial output, the civilian sectors that had been quietly subsidizing a war the government had told them was almost over for 9 months, with no end in sight. He also knew, because he had read the battle reports, all of them, every engagement from every theater, that the human military was not tired. It was, if anything, more organized and more capable at month 9 than it had been at month 1. As if the war itself had been a kind of accelerant. As if being pushed had made them sharper. He thought about what Velrith had said in that very first call. "You haven't seen what happens when humans stop defending and start attacking." He had seen it now. "I need to consult with my council," he said. "Of course," Dr. Stern said. The consult lasted 2 days. Not because the answer was unclear. The answer, by day 2, was very clear to everyone in the Dominion command structure, who was willing to look at the actual numbers without the filter of pride or sunk cost or institutional momentum. The answer was that the war needed to end, that the terms were survivable, and that the alternative was worse. It took 2 days because of the pride. Because of the institutional weight of 6,000 years of not being wrong, because the vote in the chamber had been unanimous, -1, and the person who had abstained was now sitting in a conference room on a neutral station, drinking coffee and being, quietly, correct about everything. On the second day, Voreth called Velrith to a private conversation. "You knew," Voreth said. "Yes," Velrith said. "You knew from the beginning." "I knew enough to know that I didn't know enough to predict exactly how it would go," Velrith said carefully. "I knew that the assumptions in our report were wrong. I knew that 60 years of observation had not captured what kind of species humanity actually was. I tried to explain that." "You failed to explain it convincingly." Velrith looked at him with an expression that was not quite reproach, something more patient than that. "I didn't have the right words. I don't think there are right words for it, actually. I think you have to see it. You have seen it now." Voreth was quiet for a moment. "What are they?" he asked. "What kind of species is humanity? Define it. In terms I can give the Council. In terms I can give the Galactic Council when I stand in front of them." Velrith took a sip of his coffee. He thought about Istanbul, about the bridge over the water, about the child and the bicycle. "They are the species," he said slowly, "that evolved on a difficult planet surrounded by things trying to kill them, fighting each other when nothing else was available, and every single time they were knocked down, they got back up. Not because of a command structure, not because of a hive mind, not because of a centralized will, because each of them individually has that response built into them." He paused. "They are 40,000 years of lessons about how to survive hard things, compressed into individuals who live only 70 years each, which means every generation has to learn the lessons again. And they do. They always do." He set the coffee down. "They are the most dangerous thing in the galaxy not because they are the strongest. They are the most dangerous thing in the galaxy because they refuse to accept that losing is final." Voreth sat with that for a long time. "I should have listened to you," he said finally. "Yes," Velrith said, "but you know that now." High Commander Voreth stood before the Galactic Council 3 weeks after the ceasefire. The chamber was full in a way it almost never was. Every species with a seat had sent a representative, and most had sent their most senior ones. The Velkari were there. The ancient Oreth had sent an observer for the first time in 300 years. The 3 allied species that had withdrawn from the campaign were there, seated carefully apart from the Dominion bloc, their presence its own quiet statement. The human delegation sat on the right side of the chamber. Dr. Stern, 3 others. They did not wear military uniforms. They wore plain civilian clothes, which Velrith thought was a deliberate choice and respected for its subtlety. Voreth spoke for 20 minutes. He gave an accurate account of the war. He did not soften the casualty numbers. He did not obscure the decisions that had been made or the assumptions that had driven them. He described what the campaign had actually looked like, on the ground and in space, as honestly as he could manage. He said, "We made a decision based on incomplete understanding. We assessed a species by the metrics we use for all species, and those metrics did not capture what humanity actually is. This was an error of intelligence and an error of judgment, and it was mine. I take responsibility for it. The Dominion takes responsibility for it." He said, "We were wrong to start this war. The terms we have agreed to are just, and we will honor them." He sat down. The chamber was quiet. Then Dr. Stern walked to the floor. She was shorter than most of the beings in the room. She had a quiet, unremarkable face that had been doing complicated work for 9 months and showed some of the wear of it. She stood at the center of the floor and looked around the chamber without hurry. "We accept the Dominion's acknowledgement," she said. "The war is over. The terms stand. We hold no malice toward the Dominion people who did not choose this war. We hold no malice toward the allied species who participated and withdrew." She paused. "We want to be clear about one thing, for the record, and for any species in this chamber that may have been watching the past 9 months and drawing conclusions." She waited a moment. "We are not looking for enemies. We never have been. We have enough things to do. We have an ocean we want to study, frankly, and a dozen other scientific projects, and about 9 months of reconstruction work that is going to take years. We have children who would like to grow up without a war." Another pause. "But if someone decides, again, that we are easy to take, Then what happened in the past 9 months will look like the quiet part of the story. She sat down. The chamber was very quiet. The reconstruction on the colony worlds took 4 years. Some of it was physical, infrastructure and buildings, and the mining systems that had been repurposed into defensive networks and needed to be returned to their original function. Some of it was harder to rebuild. The people who hadn't come back, the communities that had organized themselves around survival and now had to remember how to organize themselves around living. On New Providence, in the second year after the war, a girl enrolled in a marine biology program at the University of Earth's Oceanic campus. She had never seen the ocean before in person. When she finally stood at the edge of the actual water and looked at it, at the real thing, vast and gray-green and smelling of salt and life, moving in ways that documentaries could not fully capture, she stood there for a long time and did not say anything. Her roommate standing next to her asked what she was thinking. "I'm thinking it's bigger than I thought," she said. She started the next day. The Galactic Council added a formal notation to their record of first contact protocols. It was brief. It was placed in the section dealing with species assessment and conflict initiation. It had no official name. Galactic Council notations rarely did. It read, "Prior to any hostile action against a species, member states are required to submit documentation that they have considered the following question. Has this species survived adversity? If yes, what kind, for how long, and at what cost?" The historical record suggests that species which have survived extended periods of hardship, resource scarcity, or continuous internal conflict may demonstrate adaptive responses to external threat that standard assessment protocols do not adequately capture. Refer to the events of date redacted, reference on file, for the most detailed case study on record. The case study on file was 900 pages long. The first page had a short summary. The summary said, "A spacefaring species with 140 years of interstellar travel experience and a 40,000-year record of continuous internal conflict was assessed as a low-resistance target. This assessment was incorrect. For full analysis, see subsequent pages." Most species who read it read the full 900 pages. Then they read it again. Some of them, after that, sent diplomatic overtures to Earth, new trade agreements, requests for cultural exchanges, invitations to galactic community forums that humanity had never been invited to before. Dr. Stern handled most of those. She had a very organized calendar. She also, in a small office off the diplomatic wing of UEDC headquarters, kept a framed photograph on her wall. It was a picture taken somewhere on Kepler 442b after the colony was retaken. A group of people, miners and engineers and former soldiers and farmers, standing in front of the entrance to what had been Mine Shaft 7. Smiling, some of them laughing, all of them squinting in the light because they had spent a long time underground. Nobody who visited her office ever asked about the photograph. She had never explained it. Some things did not need explanation. Velrith retired from the Cathari Observer, CAS, 2 years after the war ended. He had spent 30 years as an ambassador, traveling to species the Dominion was evaluating, writing reports, making recommendations that were sometimes read carefully and sometimes filed and forgotten. He moved to Earth. Not permanently, his biology required periodic return to his home environment, but he spent 6 months of every year in a small apartment in Istanbul, on the Asian side of the water, walking the bridge in the evenings and watching the humans move. Still moving, still arguing and laughing and building and tearing down, still stopping to look at things and then starting again. He had a coffee shop he went to every morning. The owner knew his order. The regulars recognized him. A few of them knew who he was. Most of them did not and treated him as they treated anyone with the particular flavor of Istanbul friendliness, which was not effusive but was consistent and real. He had tried once to explain to the coffee shop owner what he had tried to do before the war, and why it had mattered that he had tried. The owner, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and a permanently amused expression, had listened, nodded, and then said, "Good. Better to try and not be listened to than to not try." She had refilled his coffee. He had thought about that for a long time. Better to try. The sun went down over Istanbul on an ordinary evening, as it had done for every ordinary evening that city had survived, which was a number so large it had lost meaning. The lights came on. The bridge filled up with people. Somewhere a radio played something in a language he was still learning. He sipped his coffee. He watched the humans. He was glad, in a way he could not fully articulate in his own language, that they were still here.